Hello, my name's Elizabeth, and today I'm at ARC with James Lindsay. So James Lindsay, you wrote a book in 2020 called Cynical Theories. Can you tell us a little bit about the book?
Yeah, the idea of cynical theories was to chart these we now call them woke theories, like gender studies and maybe feminist theory to a degree, but certainly critical race theory, post-colonial theory, queer theory, and sexuality studies, to chart them and the degree to which postmodern philosophy, French postmodern stuff from the 70s and 80s, influenced the development of those disciplines of thought. And so, of course, the contention is that these are cynical analyses, hence the title Cynical Theories. These are cynical analyses of the social factors like race, sex, sexuality, gender, and so on, that I don't think that we should really entertain as serious attempts to explain those phenomena.
There's some interesting research in your book where you sent a research paper to these left-wing organizations, basically rewriting Mein Kampf.
Yes.
Can you tell us a little more about that?
Yeah, in the year before we wrote Cynical Theories, Helen Pluckrose, my co-author, and I, along with a third academic named Peter Boghossian, did something that's come to be known either as Sokal Squared or as the Grievance Studies Affair. And what we did was where we actually learned what we ended up coming to write about in Cynical Theories. We wrote 20 fake academic articles for those exact disciplines: sexuality studies, feminist theory, gender studies, queer theory, critical race education in particular. And we sent these articles in to these peer-reviewed academic journals of relatively high standing within those subdisciplines to see if they would accept really egregious, hilarious, sometimes horrifying argumentation and conclusions. And they did. They accepted 7 of these 20 papers that we sent
So
in.
it's one about dogs raping other dogs?
Yeah, the argument of that paper was that that there's a phenomenon of rape culture. So rape is endorsed by especially the men in culture, allegedly. And the one way that we can determine how men endorse rape culture is by examining the way that they react versus how women and gay men react. Straight men, we alleged, react positively when dogs rape each other at dog parks, whereas women and gay men are horrified by this. And therefore, there's obviously a rape culture problem. They endorse dog rape, so they would endorse human rape. And therefore, what we concluded was we could train rape culture out of men by training men the way we train dogs, using obedience manuals, using leashes, shock collars, and so on, which is obviously absurd. But this paper not only was accepted by Gender, Place, and Culture, a leading feminist geography journal, it was given an award for excellence in scholarship in the year 2018, one of the top papers they claimed that they'd ever received, which is even further into the absurdity. And like you said, one of the papers was a rewrite of the 12th chapter of Hitler's Mein Kampf. This is where Hitler spent 11 chapters complaining about Germany in the 1920s. Chapter 11 is where he's complained that everything's the fault of the Jews. And then chapter 12, he says we need a movement. And what's it going to be made of? And how will we respond to this problem? And he outlines what becomes the skeleton framework for what later became the 24 points of the Nazi Party. And we rewrote that chapter as intersectional feminism by just swapping out where Hitler wrote our movement. We put in intersectional feminism. We made it attack other kinds of feminism, where Hitler attacked the Marxists and the liberals and the other parties of Germany. And this was accepted by a feminist social work journal, even though it was a very close rewrite of Nazi ideology.
Yeah, so it shows what type of research, these ludicrous research, these people will latch on to.
Yeah.
Recently, I saw that you sent a rewritten version of Karl Marx's Communist Manifesto to a Christian nationalist organization.
Yeah, that's right.
One of the criticisms I hear online about that is this text was it was written so much that it was completely different to the original Communist Manifesto.
That's absolutely ridiculous. It was it is modified. It is much less modified than the rewrite of Hitler's Mein Kampf that we sent to the Feminist Journal. In the Feminist Journal, we had to write several pages of preamble to kind of get it under the radar. We changed, in case there was checks for plagiarism, we changed literally at least one word out of every three, because they check for three continuous words to see if it matches the original text. So this Mein Kampf rewrite, which virtually every conservative accepted as definitive proof that there was something wrong in feminist theory, was much more modified than the rewrite of the Communist Manifesto that I sent in. In fact, the rewrite of the Communist Manifesto that I sent to American Reformer was so lightly edited that within an hour of it being posted on their website, somebody in the comments, who is presumably a fan of their website, wrote, "Do you realize this is the Communist Manifesto?" and showed identical paragraphs. So an average reader of their magazine recognized what it was instantaneously because it was so lightly rewritten.
I guess one of my questions is this not an example of people being captured by rhetoric? I mean, one of the reasons the Communist Manifesto was so popular in the Victorian age, the age of industrialization, where there was slums and working people had to go through awful working conditions. They were maybe captured by Karl Marx's rhetoric in the same way we're often captured by rhetoric today.
I mean, that's probably right, because Karl Marx didn't have any substance to what he was saying, but he did have a lot of grievance-based rhetoric that inflamed the working class. And it is true that there were particularly ugly challenges during the industrialization period of the mid-19th century. So I wanted to capture exactly that rhetorical flair. And so where Karl Marx talks about the proletariat, I substituted in the New Christian Right. Where he talks about the bourgeoisie, I substituted in classical liberalism and the post-war liberal consensus, as it gets called. And I just kind of massaged some of the arguments. If he talked too much about economic affairs or whatever in the Communist Manifesto, I would swap that out for something to do with, values or cultural issues. But it was a very light touch change. And I think that was the point I was trying to prove, is that there's a contingent on this allegedly Christian nationalist right that is caught up in a grievance-based rhetoric, in a our movement is unduly mistreated, and therefore we have a right to, the point of the Communist Manifesto in the second chapter is that the communists have a right to rule through the proletariat. They're going to become the vanguard of the proletariat, or they're going to, as Lenin later called it, they're going to lead the proletariat, and that's the proper relationship. So I wanted to bring that same theme out, that there's this new, what they call themselves the new Christian right, as a matter of fact. Whether we like the term woke right or not, they call themselves the new Christian right that sees itself as the kind of the faction of right-wing politics that expresses true Christian conservative belief, and that, in my opinion, from their perspective, anything that falls outside of their ideological purview is unacceptable.
And that's one of the questions I wanted to ask you. What exactly is woke right? Because people are often confused by this term. It's like saying the left wing or the real Nazis. It's the equivalent of that, when to compare the left wing to Nazis or to compare the right as the real wokes doesn't really make sense, because the left and right divide is people who ideologically disagree with one another.
Right. So for me, woke is more of a methodology, it's a way of viewing the world. In fact, it's a worldview, a Weltanschauung in German, rather than a set of conclusions, like about race, sex, and gender, and so on. But it does include things like identity politics and intolerant rhetoric and a bent toward authoritarianism and all of this attitude, because woke means awoken, like you've wakened up to a truer view of reality that everybody outside has of that critical consciousness of reality has a false consciousness of reality, and therefore doesn't have a valid opinion. So they need to be silenced, and if they put forth their arguments or their beliefs too strongly, then they need to be, punished more vigorously. I usually define woke right much more simply, though, as it's people that claim conservative values who act like leftists. So cancel culture, identity politics. You have to agree with their ideology to have a true, like I just described with the critical consciousness versus false consciousness. You have to agree with their ideology to be a true or authentic member of the group that you're claiming to speak for. So, for example, in England, you could say that there's a woke right view of being English would be that if you disagree with you could be English 50 generations back or however many, but if you disagree with the political movement, then you're not truly English. So it's like the no true Scotsman inverted. Yeah. Right?
I've heard that online by...
But that's how the woke operated with races, right? So you'd have black people who disagreed with the leftist politics, and they would say that they were racially but not politically black.
Well, one of the examples I've seen online, particularly from civic nationalists, is they say people like Jeremy Corbyn and George Galloway aren't real Englishmen because they're left wing. So they see the English identity as aligning with a set of values rather than being.
That's exactly what I'm
soil.
talking about. Yeah, that's exactly what I'm talking about.
One interesting thing is, I don't know if you've ever heard of a book called by Isbin, the playwright, Enemy of the People. Mm-hmm. It's written in the 1800s, and it's about. I might have talked about this in another interview, but it's about this scientist who finds out there is chemicals in the water in this town, which the town makes its money from, which are killing the population. Yeah. So he goes to his brother, who's the mayor, and he says, you need to sort out the baths. If we let this continue, all of the people are going to die. Yeah. And his brother says, I make a lot of money from this. I'm not going to do anything about it. So he goes to the press, and the press are manipulated by his brother to not publish it. And in the end, the whole town goes after him. Yeah. And his children are kicked out of school. He loses his job. His wife's harassed for being associated with him. His house is vandalized. And it's an example of cancel culture, which has existed throughout history. So maybe we need to move on from these terms of left and right and recognize that there is a problem with humanity of when you don't fit in the right box, they reject the outsider.
I think that's right.
Plato's cave, and the prisoner leaves the cave, he comes back, they want nothing to do with him.
They want nothing to do with them. That's right. That's very similar to that. So enemy of the people as a phrase was picked up very strongly by Mao Zedong in the Chinese Communist Party. And so he labeled the people who agreed with his project the people. And he labeled the people who and these were the literal labels that the Mao used. There were the people, and then there were the enemies of the people who disagreed with the program. And he laid out in a speech in 1957, a famous speech. He said, well, who are the people and who are the enemies of the people? He said, well, the people are the people who agree with the building of socialism, and the enemies of the people are the people who disagree with the building of socialism and hinder its progress. And it was the exact same treatment. And, vicious cancel culture, famously vicious cancel culture. And of course, the immediate aftermath of this 1957 speech was the Great Leap Forward, which then went unopposed because he had run so many purges through China at that point, and a massive purge, the anti-rightist campaign, had just taken place following this exact line, this exact record. Who are the enemies of the people? Well, the enemies of the regime. How do we find them? Well, we did the 100 Flowers campaign, and now we found out who the rightists truly are, and let's throw the rightists out because communism's a leftist movement. And what happened was 100 million people, well, 50 million people probably, in the Great Leap Forward specifically, died. Starved, froze, exposure, disease to a lesser degree, or murdered. And this is, I think, a predictable result of when we start to follow this. We're the true representatives of whatever it is going forward because our ideology is perfectly correct, and everybody who disagrees with us is intolerable and has to be canceled.
What's interesting is today, if you're right-wing, people often throw around the term of you're a Nazi, and the same exact thing was happening in the Roman Republic. So the Gracchi brothers, the slur that the politicians threw at them was you're a monarchist, because that to them was being called Nazi in their age. And when that slander didn't work, they then resorted to political violence. But we've seen throughout history people using these slurs to shut people down, and it's not a new thing.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, and I guess my last question for you is online. A lot of people think when you mean woke right, you're referring to if you identify your group as what they mean is if you see yourself as a part of a kin, that's woke. Do you think identifying yourself as English and seeing your in-group as English is woke?
No, not unless we go further and take that step to say that it confers a certain consciousness. So that if you don't agree with what the true English people believe, then you're not truly English. So if it's a fact of kin, then it's a fact of kin. If it's a fact of your family heritage or your ethnic heritage, it is what it is. That's a fact of reality, right? If, on the other hand, you say, this is what English people believe, and if you don't believe this, you're not English, then, especially when you start tying that to the ethnicity, you start to run into this kind of woke problem. And when you add in the absolute intolerance, not to say, because you have a major problem in England with immigrants who do not want to assimilate. This is, it's foolish not to talk about this problem at this point. Of course, it's very controversial. You're almost not allowed to talk about it in many cases. But the fact is that And those people may or may not be English. But the fact is that when you start to say that people who ethnically are English are not English because their political values are wrong, it's the same as when the left said that Larry Elder's not black, that he's the black face of white supremacy because he disagreed, or that Dave Chappelle made his jokes from a position of white privilege, even though Dave Chappelle is black. It was because he wasn't touting the political line. So when you tie the ethnicity to a political line that you have to carry, now you've left this idea of kinship, and you've entered into a realm of ideological conformity tied to kinship, and it's a different thing.
Purity spiraling as
Yeah.
well. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense now. Thank you very much.